the RB dead zone, where fantasy managers cringe where they have to take a running back. Last year, the RB dead zone brought us Isaiah Pacheco, Raachad White, Jonathan Taylor after he came out with the injury news, DeAndre Swift. So this year, we're talking through some running back dead zone values that I think could provide some serious upside on your fantasy football roster. Starting it off with player number 1. Guess who's back? It's going to be Mr. Raachad White, who right now is still in the RB dead zone, where he is going pretty much in the 6th round on Underdog, where he's going at pick 64, overall RB 15. RB 15 for Raachad White, who last year finished as the RB 10. Now, I know why Raachad White is falling down the draft boards right now, and it's because Bucky Irving was brought in to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization in the draft this year, and a lot of people assume that he is going to be taking all the receptions because last year, Raachad White had 64 overall receptions. That was the leading catalyst for his terrible yards per carry, which he had 3.6. So a lot of people are assuming, hey, he's going to be still getting those 270, 250 rushing attempts, but he's not going to be getting those overall receptions. That's going to go to Bucky Irving, and that's why his overall value is going to be going down. Now, I don't totally agree with it because I don't look at Bucky Irving as a guy that's going to come in and absolutely take those early down pass work away from Raachad White. They still have Baker Mayfield, who's the absolute check down king. Love to check the ball down to Raachad White. So for me, I think the RB10, RB12 range is a fair assumption to be made when we're valuing Raachad White heading into next season. I think that's definitely where you can finish. And right now you're getting him at RB15 in the RB dead zone, which is absolutely crazy to me because if we do take a look at the RotoViz projection machine, like even RotoViz and their projections, they're a little bit lower on Raachad White with only 232 rushing attempts this year, 882 yards, 3.8 yards per carry. So they're keeping the yards per carry pretty much the same. But instead of having somewhere around like 65 to 70 receptions, he's at 47 receptions. So I understand the little bit of worry that there is with Raachad White and a lot of people not wanting to draft him in the RB dead zone. But trust me, I'm taking Raachad White when he is in the RB dead zone because we've seen him have elite level fantasy football upside before. He will do it again. My second player that's in the RB dead zone, that's kind of crazy that he's in the RB dead zone and we're being left for dead, is going to be Mr. Kenneth Walker. And if you've been tuning into the channel, I honestly have not been the biggest Kenneth Walker believer, and it hasn't been because of Kenneth Walker. Honestly, it's been because of Pete Carroll, this overall offense, and the fact that they drafted Zach Charbonnet last year. Because I agree, Kenneth Walker is a more talented running back than Mr. Zach Charbonnet. But last year was only RB20 on a points per game basis with 13.3. The year before that was RB16. So we drafted Kenneth Walker as like the RB6, RB7, RB8 range last year, and he didn't live up to it. So now we've had 2 years of pretty much just RB2 production from Kenneth Walker, and that's really started to push him down the boards. But the reason that I'm excited for Kenneth Walker is we do not know how this Seattle Seahawks offense is going to go. We assume JSN is going to be more in 3 wide receiver sets. We assume they're going to throw the ball a little bit more, but could them throwing the ball a little bit more, having a little bit more explosive of an offense, help Kenneth Walker overall and get a little bit more touchdown upside? Because if we're looking over at RotoViz, they're projecting Kenneth Walker 235 rushing attempts, 963 yards, 6 total touchdown, 4.1 yards per carry, and 31 overall receptions, which if we kind of view how that compares to what he just did this last year, they're giving him a few more touches, a few more yards. Really, RotoViz is projecting him somewhere in that like RB15 to RB17 range. So I understand that maybe we think Kenneth Walker is just a middling RB2 in fantasy football. But for me, when I'm sitting here in the RB dead zone, typically if you're having to take a running back in the RB dead zone, it's because you didn't take a running back early and or you're getting your second running back. I want to take a guy in this range that has ultimate level upside. And as much as I don't think we've seen it from Kenneth Walker over the last 2 years, I do think he does have that upside and he is that type of talent in the running back position. So give me all the Kenneth Walker that I can get here in our Underdog, in our redraft leagues when he's going off the board as RB16, overall player 69 in the dead zone. Trust me, don't leave Kenneth Walker to die. Draft some Kenneth Walker and of course grab Zach Charbonnet as a good handcuff. Next guy in the RB dead zone that we need to talk about is going to be Mr. Joe Mixon, who lands on the Houston Texans from the Cincinnati Bengals. And Joe Mixon has been the man of consistency. He's going at the early part of the 6th round, so also kind of in this dead zone. And you guys all know I'm a Cincinnati Bengals fan, and over the last few years, I've kind of been out on Joe Mixon, but he's proven me wrong. Last 2 years, RB11 on a points per game basis, RB7 on a points per game basis. And my big concern with Joe Mixon has always been that explosion, but he's been able to get the volume. Like last year, I know Joe Burrow was hurt, but he did put up 257 rushing attempts, didn't have the same points per game. He still had 257 rushing attempts, 1,000 yards, 4 yards per carry. My biggest concern always with Joe Mixon is we know that cliff's coming. With Joe Mixon being 27 years old, he was in that same running back class as CMC, as Leonard Fournette, as Dalvin Cook, as Alvin Kamara, and he was a younger running back in that class, so of course he's a little bit younger, but he still has the same amount of miles as all those guys, and we saw what's happened to Dalvin Cook. Like, the cliff can just happen to you in an instant, and so that's what makes me really worried about Joe Mixon. But the benefit is he's landing with the Houston Texans, who don't have a clear running back. Dameon Pierce was not that guy. Devin Singletary was just a jag, so we put Joe Mixon in. We assume he can do better than those guys, and you have an elite level offense, a young budding quarterback with CJ Stroud. It's really exciting, and so I really like some Joe Mixon. I think especially if you're getting him as like your RB1, let's say you want an absolute zero RB build and Joe Mixon is your first running back off the board, I absolutely love it. If you get him as your RB2, even better. Love Joe Mixon in the RB dead zone. My next player that we're going to talk about in the RB dead zone is going to be David Montgomery, and Mr. David Montgomery came out last year and was an absolute touchdown machine. When we're talking about David Montgomery last season, we were all really in on Jahmyr Gibbs. We saw the upside, we saw the first round draft pedigree that Jahmyr Gibbs got, but then what did David Montgomery do? He came out in the first few weeks and absolutely dominated. I mean, first week had 13 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points. In week 2, week 4 had 34 fantasy points. Week 5 had 20 fantasy points. And then on the splits, David Montgomery ended up getting injured, and then when he came back, the splits started to go a little bit more in Jahmyr Gibbs' favor. But still, last year having 13 total touchdowns in 14 games played, that is good numbers. He almost scored a whole touchdown each and every game and had 4.6 yards per carry. We assume this Detroit Lions offense is going to be just as good as it was last year. They didn't add any significant pass catchers. They still have Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, but it's really the Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery show. Now, if we look at the metrics overall last year, he had a 48% snap share. I assume that goes down to somewhere around 45 to 44. They're going to give Jahmyr Gibbs a few more touches this year into year 2, because I do think Jahmyr Gibbs will improve on his blocking, be able to be in there a little bit more, but I still think that overall touchdown upside David Montgomery has, and in an offense that's going to be elite with an offensive line that's elite, that makes me really pumped for David Montgomery. Now, if you're in the RB dead zone and David Montgomery ends up being your RB1 because you went absolutely zero RB, that makes me feel a little bit of anxiety in my chest. But if you do get, like, let's say you want a little bit hero RB and you need to get double tap on that second running back, and that's David Montgomery, I think David Montgomery's fine in the RB dead zone to be that second running back for you. And my next guy we're going to be talking about in the RB dead zone is going to be Rhamondre Stevenson, who Rhamondre Stevenson just got the big contract extension with the New England Patriots. And I'll be completely clear, whether it's been in Dynasty, whether it's been in redraft leagues, I really have never positioned myself to draft Rhamondre Stevenson. I've never gone out of my way to draft him because over the last 3 years, 9.6 fantasy points per game, 14.7 was the RB10 that year, 12.1 this last year was the RB27. And while we're looking at Rhamondre Stevenson, I haven't seen the ultimate level upside. And the reason that I haven't seen the ultimate level upside is because the last 2 years he's had Mac Jones as his starting quarterback. It just really hasn't been great. It just really hasn't been a great offense for Rhamondre Stevenson. And when we look at this Patriots offense heading into 2024, it doesn't really look that much better. They bring in Drake May at rookie level quarterback. We'll see. Maybe Drake May becomes CJ Stroud, lights the world on fire, but typically we don't see that out of rookie level quarterbacks. Now, we do see the volume get added to a guy like Rhamondre, and last year really too, he was injured, only played in 12 total games. So there is the world that Rhamondre could get back to being a top 10 level running back in fantasy football. And while I'm really pumped about that, he is cheaper than some of those other options that we've talked about earlier. Rhamondre Stevenson going off the board as RB20, overall player 82. So you can get Rhamondre Stevenson in the 7th round in the RB dead zone. I'll be clear, I'm a sicko. I think if you've gone absolute zero RB, like you've drafted an elite level quarterback, an elite level tight end, if Rhamondre Stevenson somehow was to be your RB1, I don't love it, but I love it more than if David Montgomery was your RB1. And I don't know if it's just because of the volume, if I just think Rhamondre is going to be that type of guy this year. And I know they brought in Antonio Gibson, but for me, Antonio Gibson is not going to get the same volume of touches as a guy like a Zeke did last year. Rhamondre Stevenson currently on RotoViz projected 213 rushing attempts, 852 yards, 4 yards per carry, 5 rushing touchdowns, and 26 receptions, which would put him similarly to what he's done before. I just really believe that in everything in my heart that Rhamondre Stevenson, if he were to get more of this bell cow role, if he would get more of this overall rushing attempts, because right now we're projecting the New England Patriots to have 417 rushing attempts and 600 passing attempts, which just means they're a terrible team and they're going to be passing the ball all the time. I think if that rushing attempts actually goes up, if we get to see that rushing attempt get to like 450, we could be talking about Rhamondre Stevenson really exceeding his ADP and absolutely in this RB dead zone. Absolutely loving some Rhamondre Stevenson. And my final player in the RB dead zone that I'm loving, it's Alvin Kamara. Like, Alvin Kamara has been living the life of a running back that we have all loved. Alvin Kamara last year was the RB3 on a points per game basis with 17.9. He came into the season with a lot of question marks around his suspension, what was going to be happening with Alvin Kamara. And we head into this next year, and the Saints offense is absolutely abysmal. Derek Carr is not a good quarterback. They didn't really add anything in the NFL draft for receivers, so it's really just the Chris Olave show out there. It's really just Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave. And last year, the thing that held Alvin Kamara up more than anything, it was not the fact that he had 180 rushing attempts for 694 yards. No, it was the fact that he had 75 total receptions. And we've talked about this with Alvin Kamara, is he's going to age a little bit different than a lot of these other running backs because he is so predominant with the receptions. Now, catching receptions as a running back is a little bit finicky on a year-to-year basis, but when we're looking at guys in this backfield, we're looking at a guy like Kendra Miller, we're talking about a guy like Jamal Williams, they are not going to overtake Alvin Kamara in that pass-catching role, and even so more. Like, let them get more of the rushing attempts, ground and pound, straight down the middle. Let Alvin Kamara be on the outside doing what he does best. I know Alvin Kamara is getting older. He is 28. He will be 29 this season. If we're talking about Alvin Kamara being able to get somewhere around that 65 to 70 receptions, we could be still talking about Alvin Kamara being a top 8, top 10 running back, and which is crazy because honestly, when I've gotten to the 7th round, I haven't taken a ton of Alvin Kamara because I haven't just been in the spot where that typically falls. But if that happens in the RB dead zone, give me all the Alvin Kamara that I can because I think you're getting an absolute steal at that later ADP when you sometimes have to take shots on earlier guys that aren't going to have the same type of upside that a guy like Alvin Kamara has. When we're talking about Alvin Kamara actually going behind David Montgomery in the RB dead zone, give me a break. Give me Alvin Kamara. I know the touchdown upside's there for David Montgomery, but Alvin Kamara is going to get volume. So hit that like and subscribe button if you like fantasy football. We are going to help you win a fantasy football championship this year. We're going to be putting out more content as we continue on in July, August. It's going to get good. We want you here in the community. So hit that like and subscribe button. Here are some more videos if you haven't tuned into these already, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.